Ice Cube is 56 years old, a living storm carved from South Central concrete. And today he stands at the edge of one of the most shocking chapters of his entire life. This is the same man whose voice shook the nation with Straight Outta Compton. The same fire that turned Friday into a cultural monument. The same pen that once made the federal government send a warning letter. And yet, after decades of shaping American music and film, Ice Cube now finds himself facing a battle no chart, no movie, no trophy could ever prepare him for. In 2021, he walked away from a $9 million Hollywood role, a decision so rare it echoed across the industry like a silent explosion. Studios paused, agents froze. Doors that once swung open for him suddenly drifted shut. Not with anger, not with punishment, with something colder, quiet erasure. At the same time, the Big Three, his league built on sheer will, was burning through tens of millions just to survive. Every contract, every arena, every risk, all carried by one man. Tonight you will see the storm behind the legend. And before we begin, take a moment to subscribe to the channel and tell me, what time is it where you are watching right now? In the year 2021, long before most people understood that a quiet storm had already begun tightening around him, Ice Cube stood in front of a decision that stunned Hollywood with the force of a sudden blackout. A man who had survived South Central streets, NWA's firestorms, federal attention, and more than 3 decades of pressure simply walked away from a movie role worth $9 million. No speeches, no explanations, no soft landing. He just stepped back, as calmly as a man closing a door on a house that no longer felt safe. To studio executives, it looked unthinkable. To agents, it felt like watching a giant set himself on fire. But to Ice Cube, it was the same instinct that kept him alive as a 12-year-old kid. When something feels wrong, you leave before it burns through you. Hollywood had never seen anyone reject that kind of money without flinching. Not fading actors hungry for relevance. Not young stars terrified of losing momentum. And certainly not a legend who had already rewritten the culture once. Behind the velvet curtains of the industry, whispers spread like cold wind. Meetings shifted. Scripts moved to newer faces. Rooms that once carried his presence fell strangely still, as if the air itself stepped aside. It was not hatred. It was not revenge. It was something colder, quieter, sharper. The sense that Hollywood was moving forward without checking whether he was still standing in the hallway. At the same time, the Big Three, his 3-on-3 league that critics once mocked as a rapper's daydream, was burning through tens of millions just to stay alive. Contracts piled up. Arena bills swelled. Every decision felt like lifting a cement block with bare hands. Some nights, when the numbers looked dangerous and the future felt paper thin, Ice Cube sat alone at his desk, staring at the folder from Hollywood he had refused. And even in that silence, he knew he would make the same choice again. Let us go back to the time before anything had a name. Back to the days before fame, before headlines, before the world ever learned the sound of his voice. Back to the fragile beginning, where every giant story starts as nothing more than a quiet heartbeat inside an ordinary house. It was the summer of 1969 when O'Shea Jackson came into a world that already felt old and tired. He was born in Westmont, a corner of South Central Los Angeles, where daylight seemed thin and hope felt like something you had to chase, not something that arrived on its own. The streets were cracked like dried earth. Sirens echoed more often than laughter. And the air carried a heaviness that settled on every porch, every doorway, every child. His father, Hosea Jackson, worked long days tending the grounds at UCLA. Each evening he returned with the slow, steady walk of a man who knew responsibility by name. His mother, Doris, moved through hospital shifts that drained the body and carved deep lines of worry into the face of a woman who loved fiercely but feared the world outside her front door. They were not poor in spirit, but dollars were stretched so thin they felt like they could tear at any moment. Inside that small house, conversations were scarce. The clink of silverware, the low hum of the refrigerator, the stubborn tick of an old wall clock. Outside, police lights swept across windows like restless shadows. Dogs barked, engines revved, gunshots cracked through the night like the sky itself was breaking open. Ice Cube shared this uneasy world with his older brother Clyde. And though creativity ran in their family with cousins like Del the Funky Homo Sapien and rapper Cam, even art could not soften what was coming. When Cube was 12, tragedy struck with a force no child could prepare for. His sister Beverly, a teenage girl with a soft smile and a world waiting for her, died suddenly. The news hit their home like a silent explosion. His mother fell to her knees. His father stared into nothingness, as if words had abandoned him. At the funeral, Cube stood on the sidewalk, hands buried in his pockets, watching the car move away while something deep inside him sank to a place he would never fully reach again. After Beverly's death, the house grew cold. Laughter disappeared. Meals felt like rituals of survival. Every room carried an echo of the one voice that was gone. His mother stared out windows for hours. His father spoke less each day, and Cube learned to walk softly, as if grief were a sleeping animal that might awake if he made too much noise. Outside, South Central kept teaching its lessons. The asphalt heat, the sirens that never stopped, the invisible danger lurking at every corner. It all shaped him, carved him, hardened him. By 13, he understood that the world offered no promises. At school, he moved through hallways like someone carrying a weight nobody else could see. Laughter sounded far away. Childhood felt like something that had slipped from his pockets when he was not looking. Grief did not break him. It became the quiet fire inside him, a fire that one day would rise, take shape, and speak in a voice the whole world would recognize. There are moments in a young life when the world finally stops taking and starts whispering something back. For Ice Cube, that moment arrived in the most ordinary way possible, wrapped inside a challenge from a friend, inside a school hallway that smelled like old books and dusted chalk. He was 14, carrying grief like a stone under his ribs, when someone dared him to write a few lines, just words, just something to pass the time. But what came out of him did not sound like a joke or a game. It sounded like weight, like truth, like years of silence finally cracking open. He sat at a small wooden desk in his bedroom that night, the bulb above him dim and yellow, flickering the way streetlights flicker on tired blocks of South Central, and the words began to pour out. Not pretty words, not soft words, words carved from loss, from concrete, from 12 years of understanding that life could rip a person away without warning. He wrote until his fingers ached. He wrote until it felt like he could breathe again for the first time in years. Writing was not talent, not yet. It was survival. It was the one place where he could empty the noise in his chest without frightening anyone. Pen to paper felt like the only time the world slowed down enough for him to catch up. By 15, he was filling notebooks faster than his mother could throw out the ones with torn pages. His lines had rhythm, weight, and something sharper. Truth. The kind of truth kids from nicer neighborhoods would never understand. The kind that stayed stuck in your shoes even after you walked away from the streets that shaped you. One night, after a long school day and a bus ride across a city that always felt too big, he brought his notebook to a backyard party where his cousin Sir Jinx was spinning records. It was not a stage. It was not a club. It was someone's backyard in the middle of South Central, where a porch bulb served as a spotlight and a pair of cheap speakers stood in place of a full sound system. But destiny is funny. It favors places that look like nothing. Music bounced through the yard, loud enough to shake the thin wooden fence. Teenagers talked, smoked, laughed, moved their feet to the beat, because movement was safer than staying still in a place where danger loves stillness. Dr. Dre was there that night, still a local legend in the making, with the calm, focused eyes of someone who could hear potential before anyone else did. As Ice Cube stepped up to the mic, there was no confidence in his chest. Just anger, just the memory of Beverly, just years of swallowing emotions until the only option left was to spit them out. His voice cut through the backyard like someone snapping a stick in half. Sharp, clean, real. The crowd turned, heads raised. Dre lifted his eyes from his turntable and locked onto the teenager standing in front of him. The look he gave Cube was not excitement or shock. It was recognition, as if he had been waiting to hear that voice without knowing it. It was the kind of spark that changes the air around a person. Within months, Cube found himself writing more seriously with Sir Jinx, shaping verses late into the night. Some nights he wrote until the sun started bleeding into the sky. Some nights he wrote even when he had no pen left, scratching notes into paper with whatever he could find. At 16, something impossible happened. He wrote a full track called Boys in the Hood, a story that carried the streets of South Central inside its bones. Most people his age were worrying about school dances, shoes, and homework. Cube was writing something that would redefine an entire genre. When Eazy-E bought the song from him, handing over money to a kid barely old enough to drive, the ground beneath Cube's life shifted. It was not just a sale, it was the world whispering yes for the first time. And that whisper hit harder than any applause could. 16, Ryan, most kids spend that age trying to fit in. Ice Cube spent it bending the direction of West Coast music with nothing but a notebook and a scarred childhood. The moment Boys in the Hood got it into Eazy's hands, the fuse was lit. Quietly at first, then with sparks. The song did something no one expected. It traveled. It grew. It started showing up at house parties, clubs, neighborhoods across LA. People felt the truth inside the words even if they had never seen the streets he described. They felt the fear, the weight, the humor twisted with danger. It was South Central pressed into a beat, and for the first time in his life, Cube felt something shift inside him. Not pride, not joy, something deeper. A feeling that made him stand a little straighter, a feeling that the pain he carried might have a purpose. Still, success did not arrive on a golden plate. Rap was dismissed by critics. Older generations called it noise. And Cube himself came from a neighborhood people wrote off the moment they heard its name. Doors slammed before he ever knocked on them. Some said kids from places like his had nothing meaningful to say. But the thing about pain is this: once it finds a voice, it refuses to stay quiet. He kept writing, kept learning how to turn sorrow into stories, kept sharpening each line until it hit as hard as the truth he carried. Every verse became a step out of the darkness he grew up in. And somewhere along those long nights and longer bus rides, a voice was forming. Not just a talent, not just a style, a voice that would soon punch its way into history. Long before the world called him Ice Cube, he was just a kid trying not to drown. And writing was the only hand reaching back to pull him out. There are chapters in a man's life when destiny does not knock. It kicks the door in. For Ice Cube, that moment came when he stepped into a studio that looked more like a converted storage room than the birthplace of a revolution. A handful of mismatched chairs, carpet curling at the edges, lights that buzzed like annoyed bees. And in the center of all that chaos stood Dr. Dre and Eazy-E, two men unknowingly building the match that would ignite a national fire. Cube was barely out of high school when he entered NWA. He was young, quiet, but carried a pen that felt heavier than steel. From the moment he joined, something in the chemistry shifted. If Dre was the architect of sound and Eazy was the voice of the streets, Cube became the pulse, the truth, the raw blade cutting through every track. Straight Outta Compton dropped in 1988, and the country reacted as if someone had thrown a brick through its front window. The album went platinum faster than anyone predicted. Radio stations banned tracks. Politicians condemned the group. The Federal Bureau of Investigation sent an official warning letter, something almost unheard of for musicians. It was the kind of spotlight strong enough to melt anyone standing in it. But while America raged about the lyrics, inside the group something colder was brewing. Paperwork, contracts, fine print written in ink that seemed to vanish when money arrived. Cube was being paid pennies while the album earned millions. Some days he earned less than a grocery store clerk while his words were fueling the most powerful rap group in the country. Imagine giving the world your fire and receiving an empty bucket in return. Meetings behind closed doors started feeling like traps. Compliments felt like bandages covering deeper wounds. Cube was only 19, but he could smell dishonesty the way a mechanic can smell burning oil. Something was wrong, and it was not going away. One night, he sat at a long table surrounded by people older than him, men with expensive watches and cheap loyalty. They pushed paperwork toward him, promised him security, promised him the world. Cube stared at the contract and felt his stomach twist. Every line looked like a hand trying to grab his voice and lock it away. He refused to sign. The room froze. You could have heard a coin drop on the carpet. A 19-year-old kid from South Central rejecting a deal people would have killed for. But pride is strange. It grows sharper when money gets involved. And Cube had already learned the hardest lesson at 12 years old. You do not surrender pieces of yourself just to feel safe. Walking away from NWA in 1989 was like stepping off a cliff without a rope. Fans called him crazy. Industry veterans laughed. Journalists predicted his career would end before he turned 21. Even some people in his inner circle whispered that he had blown the biggest blessing of his life. The headlines were brutal. Easy drop diss tracks. Members who once stood beside Cube now treated him like a stranger. The world loves a feud more than it loves the truth. And Cube suddenly found himself alone, staring at a future that felt as thin as tissue paper. But pain never scared him. Not real pain. He had seen his mother collapse at 12. He had heard gunshots outside his bedroom window. He had walked through schools where nobody knew how much his chest hurt. Compared to all that, betrayal felt familiar. It felt almost predictable. So he picked up his pen. Within a year, he released America's Most Wanted. Critics expected a stumble. Instead, they were hit with a cultural earthquake. The album debuted with numbers that made executives nervous. Too political, too honest, too aligned. Cube was no longer the kid who left NWA. He was the man rewriting what a solo rapper could be. Then came Death Certificate in 1991, an album so sharp, so fearless, that entire communities felt it like a punch to the ribs. Reporters called it dangerous. Fans called it necessary. Cube called it truth. The peak arrived with The Predator in 1992, the first album in American history to debut at #1 on both the pop charts and the R&B charts at the same time. A young man the industry tried to bury was now standing on top of numbers nobody had ever touched. But victories carry weight. He worked 16-hour days, slept on tour buses, lost his voice between shows. The spotlight that once felt like fire now felt like a burden. When new sounds started rising, when younger artists walked through the door he had kicked open, Cube felt the shift the way an athlete feels a cold wind before a storm. Still, he stayed steady. Behind all the noise, all the fame, all the battles, one truth defined this chapter. Ice Cube walked away from the biggest rap group in the country with nothing but dignity in his pocket. And dignity carried him further than any contract ever could. He did not fall, he rose, and the world was finally forced to look up. In 1990, just 1 year after walking away from the most feared rap group in America, Ice Cube found himself standing at another crossroads. Some men would have tried to crawl back. Some would have tried to blend in, play safe, disappear into the noise. But Cube had never been built for silence. Not at 12, not at 19, not ever. And 1990 was the year he decided to rise in a way no one expected. America's Most Wanted hit the world like a hard wind tearing through a quiet town. The album sold faster than industry experts predicted. Cube recorded parts of it in New York, surrounded by producers from Public Enemy, proving he could cross coasts without losing a single ounce of who he was. Every track felt like a pulse, angry, precise, alive. Critics called it too confrontational. Fans called it the truth they had been waiting for. But Cube did not stop. He could not. Pain had turned him into a man who needed to build, needed to create. needed to push forward as if the world behind him were collapsing. By 1991, he released Death Certificate, a project so bold that entire news stations did segments warning parents about Ice Cube. Reporters said the album was dangerous. Politicians said it was un-American. Stores refused to stock it, and yet, the album sold more than 1 million copies. People listened to it the way they listened to a storm rolling in, uneasy but unable to turn away. Then 1992 arrived, the year that changed everything. The Predator debuted as the #1 album on both the pop and the R&B charts, a feat no rapper in American history had accomplished before. More than 2 million copies sold, and he achieved this during a time when Los Angeles itself was burning for the Rodney King verdict. Cube's voice became a lighthouse in smoke. He was 23. Most 23-year-olds worry about bills or finishing school or trying to figure out their place in the world. Ice Cube was shaping an entire national conversation while carrying the scars of his childhood like invisible armor. But success does not lighten a man. Sometimes it piles weight on him until his knees shake. Cube began working 16-hour days, studio sessions that lasted until the sun bruised the sky, tours that stretched across states until the bus felt more familiar than any bed. He lost his voice more than once, lost sleep always. Fans saw the fire. They did not see the calm. Hollywood eventually came calling. And in 1991, director John Singleton, then only in his early 20s, saw something in Cube's eyes that none of the casting directors saw. Not anger, not attitude. Truth, raw truth. Truth that cannot be taught in acting school. John gave him a role in Boys in the Hood, a project that would go on to be nominated for Academy Awards and become one of the most important films of its decade. Critics were stunned. Audiences leaned in. Cube did not look like an actor pretending. He looked like a man who had lived every frame of that movie. Suddenly, Hollywood could not look away. He kept going. Friday arrived in 1995, a film Cube wrote and starred in. The budget was barely over $3 million. The studio expected a small return. Instead, the movie earned more than $28 million. It grew into a cultural monument, spawning sequels, memes, catchphrases, and a fan base that stretches across generations. People still quote it as if it came out yesterday. Cube Vision was born next. His production company became a factory of hits. Barbershop crossed 75 million. Are We There Yet passed nearly 100 million. 21 Jump Street, where Cube played the unforgettable Captain Dixon, exploded into a global success. But what people did not see were the nights when the pressure clung to him like a wet coat. Hollywood liked his energy but questioned his discipline. Studios wanted his authenticity but feared his honesty. Every meeting felt like a dance on glass. Every script was a gamble with reputation and money. And Cube was expected to carry not just the film, but the weight of being a black man in an industry still slow to share its power. He sat in budget meetings where the numbers looked like they had the power to crush a man who blinked too slowly. He worked with actors who doubted him until he outworked every one of them. He rewrote scenes late at night. He memorized lines until dawn. He studied the camera the way a mechanic studies an engine, piece by piece until he understood why it breathed. The higher he climbed, the steeper the mountain became. There were moments when he feared one flop could erase years of trust. Moments when exhaustion made his hands shake. Moments when he looked at his schedule and felt his ribs tighten. Fame does not protect anyone from fear. It simply shines a brighter light on it. Yet Cube kept moving. Because he knew one truth with the clarity of a man who has outrun too many storms to count. If you are not building, you are breaking. And he had broken enough in his lifetime. By the end of the 1990s, he had become something rare. A rapper who conquered Hollywood, a writer who built empires, a producer whose name could lift a project from nothing into a franchise. He was no longer just Ice Cube the artist. He had become Ice Cube the architect. And the blueprints he drafted in those years would shape the next chapter of his life in ways no one, not even him, could have predicted. In 2017, while most people thought Ice Cube had already climbed every mountain a man could climb, he surprised everyone by building one more. A sports league, 3-on-3 basketball, something so unusual that investors laughed and analysts rolled their eyes. They said a rapper had no place running a professional league. They said it would collapse in a year. Some said in a month. But Ice Cube had been underestimated since the day he was born in 1969. And the Big Three became the proof that he was not just chasing success anymore. He was building legacy with his own hands. The league burned through tens of millions in the early stages. Every arena contract that carried the weight of a small earthquake. Lawyers, agents, retired NBA legends, insurance, travel, salaries, broadcasting fees. It was the kind of financial risk that would keep most people awake for weeks. But Cube walked through it like a man carrying a heavy refrigerator up a staircase. Slow, steady, refusing to put it down even when his arms shook. That same year, while the Big Three fought to stand on its feet, another story began unfolding quietly. Hollywood was shifting. New faces, new rules, new priorities. And Cube, after 3 decades of fighting his way through the industry, began to feel the temperature change. It was not anger, not punishment, something colder, something quieter, like being in a room where the lights slowly dim and no one notices you are still standing there. In 2021, he turned down a $9 million movie role because he refused to comply with the studio requirement. One decision, one moment, and suddenly the invitation slowed. The calls became fewer. Projects moved on without him. It was not loud. It was not dramatic. It was a whisper. That subtle whisper that every aging star eventually hears. While navigating this shift, another pain resurfaced, the memory of Eazy-E. Back in 1995, when Cube walked into the hospital and stood outside the door, where Eazy lay fighting for the last hours of his life, he froze. The handle felt cold. His hand hovered. He could not step inside, not because he did not care, but because some regrets grow so large they block the doorway. Minutes passed, maybe hours, and then it was too late. Eazy was gone. It followed Cube 4 decades. A quiet shadow, a reminder that time does not wait for any man, not even one carved from steel. He spoke of Eazy with tenderness, with regret, with the ache of a brother he lost without saying goodbye. The wound never healed. It simply learned how to sit beside him without speaking. Yet while the world shifted and the past tugged at him, home became the place where Cube found gravity again. Kimberly, the woman he met long before fame ever touched him, remained the steady center of his life. She had been there in the years when money was short, when roles were uncertain, when late nights stretched into early mornings. She carried the weight of their home while he carried the weight of the world. Their 5 children grew into adults with their own dreams. O'Shea Jr. stepped into acting, walking onto film sets with the same fire his father once carried. Watching his son play him in Straight Outta Compton in 2015 softened something inside Cube that had been hard for decades. Family dinners grew louder. Holidays felt fuller. Grandchildren arrived and turned Ice Cube, the man who once wrote about violence and hunger and loss, into a grandfather who bent down slowly and smiled wider than he ever had on stage. Philanthropy filled the spaces where fame once lived. He supported young creators, community programs, and kids from neighborhoods that looked like the one he grew up in, but he never bragged about any of it, not once. He believed in giving others the chance that was never given to him. Today, when he walks across a Big Three arena, past fans cheering his name, he does not carry himself like the angry young voice of NWA or the Hollywood star who once shook the box office. He moves with the calm certainty of a man who has survived storms loud and storms silent, a man who no longer needs the spotlight to know who he is, because the world may shift, the doors may close, the whispers may grow, but Ice Cube remains unshaken, not because he chased greatness, but because he built every piece of it with his own hands. And maybe, as we reach the final moments of this story, something becomes clear. Ice Cube's journey was never just about fame or charts or box office numbers. It was about a man learning again and again that the world will test you in ways you never asked for. It will take from you before it gives. It will close doors without warning. It will whisper that your time has passed even when your heartbeat proves otherwise. But his life shows us something rare, something powerful, that the storms you survive become the backbone you stand on. That dignity is worth more than the biggest paycheck. That you can walk away from millions and still walk forward with strength. That family can stitch together the places the world tears open. And that purpose is not measured by applause. Purpose is measured by the peace you carry when the lights go out. If there is a lesson here for all of us, maybe it is this. You do not need permission to build your own path. You do not need the world to welcome you to make something great. You only need the courage to begin, the discipline to continue, and the heart to rise after every fall. Ice Cube built his life with those three things. And if he can carve his name from a childhood of loss and a world full of noise, then maybe there is hope for every one of us watching tonight. Before you go, he would probably tell you the same thing he told himself for years. Keep pushing, keep creating, keep your dignity close. Because one day you will look back and realize it was worth it. If this journey moved you, take a moment to subscribe to the channel so you never miss another story. And before the video ends, let me ask you one thing. What time is it where you are watching from right now?